Welcome to the Requel Pitch Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler, and let's get into something here. Now, this podcast is where I take a property and talk about how to remake it, reboot it, requel, sequel, prequel, whatever I would do to continue that story. And today's is kind of odd, but it's a remake or a recontextualization. Um, so, my buddy Brian and I, and I'm not sure when this will drop. I'm just kind of recording it because I just finished watching everything. My buddy Brian and I decided that we were going to watch The Sopranos. And because everyone talked about it's the greatest show ever, blah, blah, blah. No, it's not. And then we followed it up with watching the many scenes of Newark, which was weird because that really felt, first of all, I started doing some research and haven't discovered it, but it felt like you had a mini series that they didn't turn around and said, make it in a movie. Because the narrative was not straight. And I guess that's kind of what The Sopranos was too, in a lot of ways. Um, but what was the point in the sense of we saw Dicky Moltisanti's story? First of all, it's kind of a mess. I'll be honest. You have Christopher narrating, but why? It starts with Christopher's grave. Why? Okay? We see information in this film that contradicts information that we were told in the series. So is it because Christopher's our unreliable narrator? Like, how does he know all those things? Anyways, because he's telling from beyond the grave, he has, he's omnipresent, omnipotent knowledge. I don't know. So, first of all, let's get into this. If you've not seen Sopranos or anything, like, don't listen to this. It was interesting, but Sopranos, it was always like, what was going on, because a lot of things happen in between scenes or in between episodes or, in between seasons, and you never had a clear kind of idea of when time was going on, how much time passed in each season or whatever. So it was weird, okay? There's always a lot going on. And maybe that was to the point that why Tony was driven crazy was because there was always so much. And he couldn't keep a handle on it. I don't know. But with the mini scenes of Newark, this is what we're looking at. Because I like a good prequel. I like learning more about these characters and what made Tony. And that's what kind of asked me, like, Tony's such a secondary character, but they try to push him in the front of this film. Is it supposed to be, like, what made him? Because I don't see that. There's a lot that I'm like, there's a lot left to be desired, okay? So here's my pitch, okay? I'm gathering my thoughts here. I had this. I would open up with a voice that we don't know who it is. A male voice standing by the grave of Christopher Moltisanti. And the voice states basically that the story of their family, blah, 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 blah. And I've been able to piece it all together from different sources here and now. And I've been working on this my entire life. But here's the story of the Moltisanti cursed males, blah, blah, blah. Something like that, okay? I'm spitballing because I'm working on it. But basically, as it goes in, it starts, telling the story of Dickie and where he was and who he was, which I'm fine with, okay? We're seeing young Tony. We're seeing how Tony idolizes Dickie. We need a little tighter, like, show. The stuff with, like, Harold can be minimized more because I feel like if I was building a series, that would work. Okay? I would need that. But I need right now more of this relationship with John, Junior, and Dickie. I also need to see that Junior has a jealous streak because, he is the blood uncle to Tony, and he's kind of always taking Tony under his wing. But then Tony always turns to Dickie and looks at Dickie as his real uncle. Okay. Um, we have cameo appearances by young Carmela, by young Artie Bucco, young Jackie, but they're never really named, so we never really get to experience these characters that we learn later. And we see Tony as this um, lovable, lighthearted person, and I think as we see towards the end, where Dickie's kind of pushing Tony away, trying to stay out of his life, and more about the idea we need to see tension when Tony's dad was locked up, like who was influencing Tony, not do as much time jumping. That when Dickie dies, it flips something in Tony, and that's where Tony presses to be like, I want to know what the business is, I want to be part of the family. Or maybe Tony's first kill was getting someone that he thought was responsible for Dickie's death. Okay? And that's what pushes him into the life. Because there's talk about, hey, you want to be a civilian, you don't want to be part of it, that's fine. But let's see where Tony goes. I don't know if they were like, oh, we're going to make a second one or not. But, we should go into this. Or we have less Tony, he's barely in there, and it's more filtered on Dickie and some sort of the birth of Christopher, okay? And how there's the parallel relationship set up with. There's a line that is said really quick about Dickie's wife not being able to have kids, and then the next thing you know, boom, they got a son. And it would have been interesting if you had this, you can't have kids. So Dickie really, really tunes into Tony, but then when he has Christopher, he starts pulling out the emotion and focusing on Christopher, and Junior, who has no children and no wife, focus on Tony. I think the film was a waste of John Barenthal's acting because he just more like glorified cameos, scenes. So Christopher Moltisanti's birth, they make it like it's supposed to be some kind of mysterious thing, blah blah blah. I thought the way it's set up in the film was going to be something where we meet Hollywood Dick, which is Dickie's dad, played by Ray Liotta, and he brings over a very young wife, Jessipina, from Italy. And I thought the storyline was going to be something where Dickie, after he learns his wife can get pregnant, gets Jessipina pregnant, and it's his, not his father's. And then that's what led Dickie, the same kind of scene, but you add in the fact that the father might find out that the kid's not his, leads Dickie to murdering his dad. And you kind of have this little thing where, um, Jessipina, Dickie's real wife, Janet, I think, because she's barely in it. And it took me a moment to realize because the actresses that play Jessipina and Janet are very similar. Um, something happens. She dies in the riots too. Like, it's a big tragedy. Okay, so Dickie kind of takes Jessipina, kind of remarries, her. And I'm going to raise my father's son, my brother, as my own. That's Christopher. But a few people know the truth that it's really Dickie's. It's kind of this mystery, of like Christopher's origin. Um, and it's a big deal because you have this scene that's a huge what the hell when you find out that Jessipina doesn't really understand the life, the rules, and she has one of my favorite lines in it where Dickie's like, "I don't speak Italian," and she's like, You should learn," because that's what I said about the series when they, talk about Italy and they go over there and they don't know how to actually speak Italian, but all they do is talk about being Italian. Um, and Christopher, man, I keep thinking, Dickie murders Jessipina and he drowns her because he found out she was with a black guy that was his rival. Keep that in there, add more of the tragedy element. So now Christopher, but then that leaves Christopher not having a mother, um, but he needs one. So that means that maybe you didn't kill the wife, but you have him kill Jessipina earlier on after she gives birth to Christopher, and then Dickie and his wife take her in, take Christopher in, and say, "We'll raise him as our own." Boom. But Dickie really is Christopher's dad. And you have this tragedy of Jessipina trying to have her own beauty shop and make something of her, and we see parallels between Dickie and who Christopher will become. There's streamline the story a little bit because this is what you're focused in. Um, and then we have something with the police officer that helps hire people to kill or is the one that secretly kills um, Dickie. What we learn is it's actually Junior who has Dickie clipped because um, he laughed at Junior when he slipped and fell and hurt his back, which I think is a big character step for Junior. If you're just watching the movie, it feels like, oh my gosh, why? But if you've seen the series, you kind of understand the kind of person Junior is. But what I think should have been is Junior goes to this cop that owes him lots of money, he's in gambling debt. And the cop then goes to some street gangbangers, African American, because they want to make it look like it was Harold's crew that does it, and send someone to clip Dickie, and he gets blamed on Harold's crew, and that's what starts feuding a little bit more of this war, when really it was Junior all along. I think that you have great performances, great cast. I think the problem was you just didn't know exactly what you wanted to do with the property, and it left me very unfulfilled, very like almost like it was pointless. Um, but then what happens is you go back, you pull out at the end camera, and you find out that the person at the grave is Christopher's son, who's not part of the life because his father was killed, and he's doing well, but he's learned the truth about his father, his grandfather, the family they come from, and we don't really give any more insight into what happened at the series finale of The Sopranos. But this is just him kind of taking up and reestablishing the Moltisanti name and who they really are. And maybe even you make it a little bit more meta in the sense that he wrote this as a screenplay and he's turning it in because his father was an aspiring, screenwriter, movie producer. He got Cleaver, and now that's kind of the footsteps that um, he's going through. Anyways, that's my pitch.
And my last thing is, if you want to do this much story, you just gotta make it a mini-series. I think if you would have brought back a Sopranos prequel mini-series and done this story, it would have probably worked better. 6 episodes, maybe 3 young Tony, and then 3 of teenage Tony, and then, the end of episode 3, start of 4 is the birth of Christopher. I think that would have been your stronger story. Instead of trying to make this an actual film, I feel like there's just too much story. But let me know your thoughts.